On June 8, 2012, the Vancouver Police Department in Canada received an urgent call from a 25-year-old Chinese exchange student named Lian Ji GUO. At 7:00 p.m., Lian Ji GUO reported that his 47-year-old mother, Lian Ji GUO, who was visiting him, had gone missing just a day before her scheduled return to China. Lian Ji GUO's mother doesn't speak English, which makes her particularly vulnerable. Lian Ji GUO and her husband, Tang Jui, had traveled to Vancouver, Canada, 20 days earlier to visit their son, Lian Ji GUO, who was studying at Douglas College. They had rented a B&B and had made plans to spend quality time together as a family. Lian Ji GUO showed his parents around the city, and they were all excited to be together. After enjoying a wonderful visit with their son, it was time for Tang Jui and Lian Ji to return home. They had a flight scheduled to China on the afternoon of June 7, 2012. According to Lian's statement, on the morning of their flight, he went to the rented apartment to pick up his parents and head to the airport. However, his father was still sleeping, and with enough time available, Lian decided to let him sleep in. Instead, he took his mother to a restaurant for breakfast. After breakfast, they returned to the B&B, where Lian started loading their luggage into his car. As he was doing so, he noticed his mother watching him from the window. Lian stated that he then went to a nearby mall to get some things for them, but when he returned, his mother was nowhere to be found. Lian woke his father and asked about his mother's whereabouts. Initially, they were not overly concerned and assumed that Lian Ji had stepped outside briefly and couldn't have gone far. After trying to reach her by phone without success, they'd waited, expecting her to return. After a few hours passed with no sign of her, they began searching for her. They combed the city for a significant amount of time, but were unable to locate her. Since their flight was scheduled for that afternoon, Lian and his father went to the airport, thinking she might have taken a taxi there. Unfortunately, she was not at the airport either. As the boarding announcement for their flight was made, Tang Jui was torn between going back home and searching for his wife. However, Lian reassured his father that it must have been a simple mix-up and that he would thoroughly search for her and send her home once she was found. Jui returned home after a grueling 13-hour flight filled with confusion and anxiety. His wife's seat beside him remained empty and unable to find his mother. Lian contacted the police the next morning. An immediate investigation was launched to locate Lian Ji. When the authorities arrived at the scene, they found nothing suspicious. However, the police speculated that Lian Ji might be attempting to stay illegally in Canada and did not want to return home. This theory, however, had several inconsistencies. Lian's family ran a highly successful furniture transport business, making them financially well off. They had customers worldwide, including in the US, Europe, and Southeast Asia. While Tang Jui frequently visited his son during business trips, Lian Ji was visiting Vancouver for the first time. She had no history of addiction, mental instability, extramarital affairs, or any known enemies. There seemed to be no plausible reason for her to want to stay illegally in Canada. Eventually, this theory was dismissed when Lian Ji's belongings, including her money, passport, and handbag, were discovered in Lian's car. Fearful that his mother might have been abducted, Lian embarked on a mission to find her. He distributed flyers with her picture and details, gave interviews, and held press conferences to raise awareness about her disappearance in the hope of obtaining valuable information. Tang Jui soon returned to Vancouver to assist in the investigation and search for his wife. The public, particularly the Chinese community, was deeply moved by the plight of the father and son, who were desperate to find their loved one. Many locals volunteered in the search efforts. Meanwhile, the police continued their investigation, but despite their efforts, several days passed without any significant leads. The absence of ransom calls weakened the kidnapping theory, prompting the police to consider a more sinister outcome. As a last resort, they began to scrutinize the family members, exploring a different angle. During their investigation, a peculiar piece of information caught their attention. It turned out that Yuan had rented an apartment in the same B&B where his parents were staying, but he had never disclosed this to the authorities. Until then, it was believed that Yuan was living in a separate apartment and visiting his parents intermittently during their stay. Now, it appeared that he had been staying right next door to them the entire time. When questioned about this matter, Yuan simply replied that the police had not asked him, so he hadn't mentioned it. Further inquiry into why he rented a room in the B&B when he already had a separate apartment nearby revealed his intention to spend as much time as possible with his parents. Although this information did not prove Yuan's involvement in his mother's disappearance, his nonchalant attitude raised suspicion. Investigators also noticed that Yuan was attempting to downplay his English-speaking abilities, evading certain questions along the way. This behavior seemed peculiar, especially considering his 6 years of study in Canada. Consequently, investigators began to view Yuan as a person of interest. Another inconsistency arose in his narrative. Initially, he informed the police that his mother had been alone and went missing from the B&B. However, he later changed his story, stating that they had gone for breakfast and she disappeared from there. Furthermore, he altered his account once again, claiming that she was in his apartment when she vanished. Shocked by Yuan's lies, Tang Ju confronted him, questioning why he would fabricate such stories. Yuan explained that he did it to protect his landlord from legal trouble. According to Yuan, the landlord had illegally divided the rent and had done him a favor by not involving the police in his apartment. Although the excuse seemed feeble, Tang Ju chose to focus his efforts on finding his wife rather than arguing with his son. Meanwhile, the police continued to delve deeper into the case, seeking clues. They interrogated the tenants of the B&B in Richmond, Vancouver, and they all reported that the family had a harmonious relationship. However, they'd reached a dead end, unable to gather any substantial evidence. 2 weeks later, during a press conference, Tang Ju and Yuan expressed that while they could not dismiss the possibility of something sinister occurring, they held hope that Lian Ji was safe and would be reunited with them soon. At this point, investigators were leaning toward the theory of homicide rather than a mere disappearance. They intensified their manpower and conducted searches in nearby wooded areas in the hope of finding remains or any evidence. However, their efforts yielded no results. With the family's business in China facing difficulties, Tang Ju had no choice but to return home once again, relying on his son to sustain the search for his mother. Yuan assured his father that he would continue the quest before persuading him to depart. On July 20th, 2012, Lian Ji's case was handed over to Canada's Integrated Homicide Investigation Unit. From the beginning, IHIU detectives suspected the involvement of Lian Ji's family members in her disappearance and potential homicide. However, they were uncertain whether Tang Ju or Yuan Shi-Tang was responsible. The detectives focused their attention on Yuan due to the inconsistencies in his statements. During their search of the B&B, where Yuan had stayed, the investigators discovered traces of blood on the ceiling, walls, closet, and nightstand in his room. A significant amount of dried blood was also found on the bed. The blood samples were sent to the lab for testing, but it couldn't be determined who they belonged to. Since the blood evidence alone was insufficient, Yuan could not be apprehended. The detectives also wanted to search Yuan's apartment, but they lacked enough evidence to obtain a search warrant, and Yuan refused to let them in without one. On the same day, July 20th, 2012, which marked 1.5 months since Lian Ji's disappearance, the police received a call about the discovery of a suitcase containing human remains on the beach near Harwood Island, a 6-hour drive from Vancouver. When the police arrived at the scene, they found the corpse of a middle-aged Asian woman. Based on the clothing, they immediately suspected it could be Lian Ji. An autopsy confirmed the identity of the body as Lian Ji. The autopsy results indicated that she had died from multiple blows to her head and spine. Chinese words marked on 5 steel nails found with the body matched the characteristics of Lian Ji, who had recently undergone spinal surgery. Unfortunately, there were no surveillance cameras in the area, making it impossible to determine who left the suitcase on the beach. Subsequently, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police took over the case and devised an undercover operation. They decided not to disclose the discovery of Lian Ji's body or inform Yuan. In early August 2012, an undercover female police officer of Chinese descent contacted Yuan, claiming to have information about his mother. They met at a local Starbucks, where she informed him about finding his mother's body in a suitcase by the sea, but had not reported it to the police. The officer offered to dispose of the body if Yuan paid her, although Yuan did not directly admit any connection to his mother's death and wanted to distance himself. The officer gave him 2 days to consider. If he didn't comply, she threatened to involve the police. Yuan called her that night, agreeing to her demands. Later, 2 more undercover officers joined them. Yuan proposed that if they killed his father, he would inherit everything and then be able to pay them. The undercover officers agreed to the plan but requested details. Falling into the trap, Yuan began revealing the entire story. Yuan, the only son of Tang Jui and Lian Ji GUO from Foshan, China, belonged to a successful business family with an annual turnover of 10 million yen. Lian Ji possessed a strong character that benefited the business, but she had a controlling nature, particularly when it came to Yuan. She was what one could call a tiger mom, scrutinizing every aspect of his life, including his career and love life. Lian Ji's control extended to the family's wealth, tightly managing Yuan's pocket money. In 2006, when Yuan was 19, his parents sent him to Canada against his will to study hotel management and build his own identity while expanding the family business. However, Yuan felt lonely and depressed in a foreign country, leading to strained relations with his parents. He resorted to lying and engaging in irresponsible behavior, such as gambling and partying, instead of focusing on his studies. He also worked part-time illegally to cover his expenses. In 2011, during a visit to China, Yuan met a girl and quickly proposed to her. However, his mother objected to the marriage, arranging a different girl for him who met her standards. This further intensified Yuan's frustration. After graduation, most of his classmates returned to China, leaving him with a small circle of friends. He desired to return to China and reunite with his fiancée. He expressed his feelings to his father, who urged him to continue. Meanwhile, his fiancée became pregnant, but then had an abortion, which pushed Yuan even closer to his breaking point. In May 2012, his parents visited him in Canada, and he rented 2 rooms in a B&B for their stay. Tensions continued to escalate between them. On the morning of June 7th, Yuan planned and executed the murder of his mother. He lured her to his room, pretending to need help cleaning up coins scattered on his bed. When she knelt to clean, he struck her on the head with a hammer. As she struggled, he covered her head with a sheet and struck her 2 more times to confirm his kill. After killing her, Yuan considered killing his father, but ultimately decided against it, fearing suspicion if both of them disappeared simultaneously. He convinced his father to return to China, while he remained in Canada to clean up the evidence. After disposing of the evidence, Yuan played the role of a concerned son and reported his mother missing. At this point, the investigators had gathered enough evidence against Yuan. However, they chose to proceed cautiously, gathering more evidence to corroborate the story. They discovered the rented car with blood traces inside and found evidence of burn stains and blood in the storage room of Yuan's apartment. Finally, on September 7th, 2012, Yuan Ji Tang was officially arrested for the murder of his mother, 3 months after her disappearance. In addition to the murder charge, he faced additional charges for plotting to kill his father. Despite initially denying everything, Yuan eventually confessed when confronted with all the evidence, including the recorded video of his confession. The news of Tang Ju's life being turned upside down spread rapidly once it became public. Yuan's arrest in China came as a shock to Tang Jui, prompting his immediate return to Canada. He couldn't believe that his son was capable of committing such a heinous act of murdering his mother. Meanwhile, Yuan showed no remorse for his actions. Surprisingly, despite Yuan's horrific deeds, Tang Jui stood by his son. Throughout the trial, he not only forgave Yuan, but also invested a significant portion of his fortune in his son's legal defense. Tang Jui reasoned that he had already lost his wife and couldn't bear to lose his only son as well. He firmly believed that his wife would understand his decision while watching over them from heaven. In court, as a prosecution witness, Tang Jui pleaded for leniency for his son, describing Yuan as a good man before their strict parenting took its toll. However, the court differed in their judgment and found Yuan guilty after a lengthy trial. On February 2nd, 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada handed down a life sentence to Yuan Tang for the second-degree murder of his mother and the attempted murder of his father. He would be eligible for parole after serving 17 years. This complex case of control and betrayal remains one of the most controversial and disheartening in recent Canadian history. While justice was served to the culprit, the family was forever destroyed by the tragic events.